The night was calm, but Daniel knew that something was about to change. As he absent-mindedly flipped through the papers on his desk, an unmarked envelope mysteriously appeared, placed atop his pile of documents. The dark-colored letter, embossed with golden lettering, looked more like an invitation than an ordinary piece of correspondence. Intrigued, he opened it. The invitation was written in fine ink, carrying an elegant yet enigmatic tone. "You are invited to a night of luxury and mystery. Come alone or do not come at all." Something about those words made his heart beat faster. He didn't know why, but a feeling deep inside told him that this would be the night that changed everything. This wasn't the kind of event he usually attended. It wasn't just a dinner or an ordinary party. There was something more, something hidden, something that pulled him in. He hesitated for a moment, but then the impulse to explore the unknown took over. The location on the invitation pointed to a luxury penthouse in the city, an exclusive area where only a select few were ever invited. And the most intriguing part? There was no explanation as to why his presence was required. As he got ready to leave, an uneasy feeling crept over him. Something wasn't right. And as the elevator ascended to the top of the building, Daniel had no way of foreseeing the storm that was approaching. The invitation, without a doubt, was just the beginning of something much bigger. He stepped into the grand, dazzling yet empty hall, his own footsteps echoing through the silence. But he wasn't alone. He could feel it in the air even before seeing the shadows shift across the room. Strange whispers floated around, and as he moved toward the heart of the party, a mysterious figure emerged before him. Diana. The blonde woman, mesmerizing and full of secrets. Her eyes, deep as a well-kept mystery, locked onto Daniel's. Without knowing what to expect, he approached her, sensing a tension in the air that no one else seemed to notice. But before he could say anything, she turned away, and in that instant the party took an unexpected turn. Things began to change. And Daniel knew that this night would only be the beginning of a dangerous game he never imagined stepping into. Daniel was absorbed by the strange atmosphere of the party. The setting was luxurious, yet there was something sinister in the air. He tried to remain silent, observing every movement, every exchange of glances, but the feeling that something was wrong never left him. And then, something caught his attention. He saw figures moving swiftly, whispers spreading among the sophisticated conversations and rehearsed laughter. This was no ordinary party. The guests weren't just there to have fun. He could feel the rising tension, as if there was a secret purpose, a hidden plan that no one else seemed to notice. That's when he spotted a group of individuals slipping away from the crowd. Their gestures were quick, almost concealed, and Daniel discreetly followed them. They weren't interested in dancing or socializing. They were watching, waiting for something. And in that moment he heard, for a brief second, a word that burned itself into his mind: infiltrators. Something shifted inside him. He knew there was more going on, something far beyond just a luxurious party. As the infiltrators spread out across the penthouse, Daniel felt the chill of paranoia creeping in. His mind raced with possibilities. He glanced toward Diana, who was still in the room, and for a fleeting second their eyes met. There was something about her he couldn't quite grasp, but one thing was certain: she was more involved than he had imagined. He felt an impulse to approach her, but before he could take action, one of the party's security guards passed by and signaled discreetly. Daniel wasn't the only one paying attention. There was something much bigger at play, something he was only beginning to understand. With every step, he felt the weight of the mystery surrounding him, as if he were walking through a minefield. He needed to uncover more, but the risk of being caught was tangible. He could feel the stranger's eyes on him, but he couldn't tell if they knew that he knew. The game had begun, and Daniel had no choice but to keep following the clues, even if it meant getting pulled deeper into the shadows of the party. As the lights shimmered around him and the music played on relentlessly, Daniel realized he was stepping into a world where the rules were different, where the infiltrators weren't the only ones playing, and where his own loyalty would soon be put to the test. The plan of the shadows was already in motion, and now he was at the very center of it all. The party continued at its perfect rhythm, but Daniel could barely pay attention to the music or the conversations around him. His gaze was fixed on a single person: Diana. The blonde woman who seemed to be at the center of everything, yet somehow distant. She floated through the room as if she were part of the scenery, but at the same time, her presence felt like a secret. She was speaking with a group of guests, yet her eyes, those intense green eyes, never left Daniel. It was as if, in an instant, the rest of the world had disappeared. His heart pounded faster. The tension between them was palpable. It wasn't just her charm or beauty that drew him in, there was something more. Something in the way she moved, in the way she always seemed one step ahead, knowing more than she let on. Something that made Daniel feel there was much more hidden behind her enchanting appearance. He stepped closer, but before he could speak, she turned and vanished into the shadows of the room. A single moment. Just one, and she was gone. He searched for her, his mind racing with possibilities. And then he realized something unsettling. Diana had been watching the same infiltrators he had seen earlier. Her demeanor had shifted, and now he knew it wasn't a coincidence. She knew more than she was letting on. And then, as if he had summoned her, she appeared beside him. No announcement, no warning. She simply appeared. The soft fragrance she carried filled the space between them. She looked at him with those piercing eyes and spoke in a low voice, almost a whisper. "You noticed, didn't you?" Daniel, caught off guard, couldn't respond immediately. The words stuck in his throat. She knew he was beginning to understand what was happening at the party. And more than that, she knew he was in danger. But what made him hesitate, what stopped him from walking away, was the almost magnetic pull he felt toward her. "There are things happening here that you don't understand. But if you want to know more, you'll have to trust me," Diana continued, now closer, with an enigmatic smile that made it clear she was in control, even if she appeared vulnerable. Daniel felt the dilemma take hold of his thoughts. He knew he should stay away from her, that he should step back from this dangerous game. But the feeling of being trapped between right and wrong, between what he wanted and what he knew he should do, was overwhelming. Diana was offering him something, but what exactly? And more importantly, what would be the price? She turned, beginning to walk away, but before disappearing once again into the crowd, she spoke in a tone that Daniel would never forget. "If you want to save the party, you'll have to get involved. But be careful. No one here is innocent." He stood frozen, his mind a whirlwind of emotions and questions. Diana was involved with the infiltrators. He knew that now. But what did she really want from him? He was risking more than he realized, but at the same time he couldn't turn away. Something pulled him toward her, something beyond reason. Daniel couldn't get Diana out of his head. The party around him, with all its lights and fake laughter, now felt like nothing more than a smokescreen. He could no longer ignore what was happening. What he had seen, what she had said, everything was spiraling into uncertainty, where every choice pulled him deeper into an endless abyss. As he walked across the penthouse, trying to process everything that had happened, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. He glanced around the corners of the room and quickly realized he wasn't alone in his thoughts. Diana was there again, watching him, but this time, something was different in her gaze. It wasn't just curiosity or interest. It was expectation, as if she were waiting for something. That's when the man in the dark suit appeared in front of him, interrupting his thoughts. He was one of the infiltrators, one of the strangers Daniel had noticed earlier. His expression was cold, calculating, and his words struck like a direct blow. "You're getting involved in something you shouldn't, my friend. If you keep going down this path, there's no turning back." A surge of adrenaline shot through Daniel's body. Something was very wrong. He knew he was treading dangerous ground, but now it was clear, he was at the center of something much bigger. The dilemma that had been forming in his mind for hours was now at its peak. Should he trust Diana? She was deeply connected to the infiltrators, yet something about her pushed him to believe in her. She seemed to be both the key to understanding everything and the greatest threat he could face. But his doubts were answered moments later when Diana reappeared, this time standing beside the man in the suit. The playful game of seduction and mystery had vanished, replaced by a much darker reality. "You have to choose, Daniel," Diana said bluntly. Her eyes were so deep that he felt as if he were being consumed by them. "You can help us save everything that's about to be destroyed. Or you can walk away. But if you do, everything you know will become a lie. What's happening here will affect the entire world." Her words echoed in his mind, heavy and ominous. Daniel looked at her, then at the man beside her, whose smirk carried a hint of malice. The truth was beginning to unfold, but it was far more disturbing than he had ever imagined. What was at stake was much bigger than a mere luxury party. Now he understood what Diana meant by saving the party. The party was just the surface of a plan that could change everything. And he was caught in the middle of it, a crucial piece in a game he barely understood. But the dilemma wasn't just about choosing between right and wrong. It was about whether or not to trust Diana. He knew she was involved with the infiltrators, but he also knew that if he did nothing, the situation would only get worse. Yet, what if she was just another part of a cruel game, a piece used to manipulate him? Was he being played, or was he helping to save what little could still be saved? The weight of the decision crushed him. What should he do? The answer seemed to be right in front of his eyes, but he wasn't sure if he had the courage to face it. Diana was challenging him, and now he knew there was no turning back. The game had reached a point of no return, and he had to decide which side he was on. "You have until tomorrow to decide," she said, her voice low but carrying undeniable authority. "If you choose the wrong path, there will be no room for regrets." She stepped away, leaving Daniel drowning in doubt, surrounded by a darkness he could barely comprehend. Right and wrong were blurring together inside him. The only thing that was clear now was that his choice would have consequences beyond his control. Daniel felt the growing pressure in his chest. Every step he took toward the truth felt heavier than the last. The party was still going on, but everything around him seemed distant, as if he were trapped in a nightmare while the world around him kept dancing, oblivious to what was about to happen. He pulled away from the crowd and headed toward the bathroom, seeking some relief, some space where he could think more clearly. But as soon as he entered, the sight before him paralyzed him for a moment. The modern bathroom was empty, except for a massive wall-length mirror reflecting his image, almost like a metaphor for what he was becoming, a version of himself he barely recognized. He stood there, on the brink of a decision that would change everything. His thoughts were in chaos, tangled with Diana's words, which still echoed in his mind. She had given him an ultimatum. If he took her side, he would be fighting against something far bigger than he could imagine. If he did nothing, he would be letting everything collapse. The sound of the door opening pulled him from his thoughts. Diana stepped in, silent as a shadow, and closed the door behind her with a calm yet determined motion. She didn't speak right away, she only approached slowly, her eyes locked onto Daniel's as if waiting for him to speak first. The tension between them was palpable. Daniel knew the truth was standing right in front of him, but something inside him kept him from looking directly at it. Not out of fear, but because he felt that, by doing so, he would lose the last fragment of his innocence. He was about to step into a game he could no longer control. "You want to know what's really happening here, Daniel?" Diana finally asked, her voice soft but carrying a weight that was impossible to ignore. "You think you're just at a party, but this is much bigger. You're standing in front of a mirror, Daniel. What you see now is not all there is. There's something behind this image, something you need to understand before making any decision." He turned back to the mirror, staring at his reflection. The person looking back at him was a version of himself he barely recognized. He was standing at the edge of a choice that would lead him down a dangerous path. If he went one way, he might never find his way back. If he chose the other, he might doom himself to an irreversible fate. Diana continued, "Nothing happening here is what it seems. We're not just a group of infiltrators, and this party isn't just a celebration. It's the stage for something much greater. You're being watched, and the choices you make will impact more than you can imagine. Now tell me, are you willing to see the truth? Or do you prefer to hide in a comfortable lie?" Daniel felt the weight of her words, but he didn't know how to respond. He wanted to scream, to understand everything at once, but the truth was so obscured that it felt impossible to grasp. Diana took a step closer, her presence filling the space. She seemed like a blend of angel and demon, just as captivating as she was dangerous. Her eyes were deep, as if they carried all the secrets of the universe, waiting for Daniel to finally accept them. "You're afraid of what you'll discover, aren't you?" Diana whispered, a barely noticeable smile on her lips. "But the truth is the only path that can save you, Daniel. We can't keep running, and we certainly can't live in an illusion. The mirror is here, reflecting everything you are, and everything you could become." Silence fell between them, heavier than before. Daniel looked at the mirror once more. His reflection felt more like a stranger than himself. He knew that, by staring into the depths of her words, his life would never be the same again. He turned back to Diana, his eyes now fully open to the reality of the choice before him. He understood now, more than just a lavish party, something far greater was at stake. Something he had no choice but to face. But was he ready to face the truth? Or was the lie the only refuge he still had left? Daniel was alone in the bathroom, feeling an emptiness he couldn't understand. The party was still going on outside, full of laughter and music, but it all seemed distant, as if he were in another world. The reflection in the mirror before him was no longer just his image, but a cruel reminder that his life had changed forever. He was at a breaking point with no way to turn back. Diana's words still echoed in his mind, but now there was something new in his chest, a weight. He knew there was more at stake than simple secrets or the intrigues of a lavish party. Something much bigger was unfolding, something he could no longer ignore. When he heard the door open, Daniel's heart raced. Diana stepped in without hesitation, her movements silent, Yet her presence seemed to fill the entire space, like a shadow he couldn't escape. She watched him, her gaze unreadable, as if she knew exactly what he was thinking, as if she could see through him. Daniel didn't have the courage to look at her immediately. Instead, his eyes remained fixed on the mirror, searching for some clue, some answer that might help him understand what was happening. Diana stepped closer, unhurried. Her eyes, green like the darkness of the night, reflected the same intensity he felt in his chest. She didn't speak right away. She just observed him, as if waiting for him to make the first move, as if she knew he had no other choice. "You're losing yourself, Daniel," she finally said, her voice low but filled with an inexplicable force. "This party isn't what it seems. And neither are you." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. He wanted to scream, to ask, to demand answers. But his words were stuck, lodged in his throat. "Look at the mirror," Diana continued, pointing softly at the reflection. "You're no longer the man who walked into this party. You're already in the game, Daniel. The only question now is, what will your next move be?" Daniel looked at the mirror, and for a moment he didn't recognize himself. He had entered the party as an ordinary man, curious and perhaps a little lost. But now the man reflected back at him was different. He was at the center of something much bigger, more dangerous. Something he barely understood but could no longer ignore. That reflection was no longer just his image. It was the representation of all the choices he would make from that moment forward. The choice to trust Diana or not. The choice to face a truth that could destroy everything or live in the illusion of comfort. "You're about to cross a line," Diana said, her gaze locked onto his face. "And once you do, there's no turning back. You will uncover everything happening here, but you may find more than you're ready to understand." She took a step closer, closing the space between them, and the tension grew. Her scent, sweet and intoxicating, surrounded him, but the fear of what she might reveal held him back. "But know this, Daniel," she continued, "not everything you uncover will be something you want to know." Daniel remained silent, feeling the pressure build. He looked at the mirror again. What he saw now wasn't just his reflection. It was the face of a man about to face something that would change his life forever. He had to choose: follow Diana and discover the truth, or turn away and leave it all behind, ignoring what was about to happen. The answer was right in front of him, but the fear of facing the truth still paralyzed him. "You will find out, Daniel," Diana said softly. "But the real question is, are you ready for what comes next?" The bathroom door opened. The sound of laughter and music flooded back into the room, but for Daniel, the world outside no longer existed. He was trapped in a reflection that confronted him with his own choices, and there was no escaping it. The mirror now was the only truth he knew. The party was at its peak when Daniel stepped out of the bathroom, but he no longer felt like part of that world. The frantic rhythm of the music, the laughter, and the cheerful voices seemed like a distant echo, a parallel reality from which he was now disconnected. His mind was elsewhere, caught in a spiral of questions and fears that consumed him with every passing second. Diana had made a promise. He knew that, and something inside him urged him to follow her. But what she was telling him, what was happening at that party, it all seemed too surreal to be true. Yet, deep in his soul, something told him he was closer to the truth than he had ever imagined. He walked through the room, lost in thought, when he saw her again. Diana stood there, at the center of the party, her eyes gleaming enigmatically, as if everything around her was just a smokescreen, and she was the only one holding the key to unveiling what lay behind it. Daniel's heart pounded. He wanted to run, but something drew him to her like an irresistible magnet. Without thinking, he approached, feeling an unexpected heat in his chest. Diana looked at him with a faint smile, but her eyes carried a tension that made the temperature in the room rise. She knew what he wanted, and he knew what she represented, the thin line between right and wrong, good and evil. When she extended her hand and invited him to a more secluded corner near the large windows overlooking the city, Daniel didn't hesitate. They were away from the crowd, alone, where nothing could interrupt what was about to happen. The silence between them was heavy, but the exchanged glances spoke more than 1,000 words. Diana took a step closer, and Daniel felt his breath shorten. She touched his face gently, the tips of her fingers brushing against his skin, as if trying to decipher his emotions, as if she knew he was on the verge of making a decision that would change his life forever. "You're afraid of me, aren't you?" Diana whispered, her lips so close that he could feel the warmth of her voice against his skin. Daniel tried to look away, but he couldn't. It wasn't just fear, it was desire too, a mixture of conflicting emotions that tortured him. He knew that if he let her in any further, if he allowed her to take over his being, there would be no turning back. But right now, in this moment, All he felt was hunger, an aching need to touch her, to feel her presence in his life, even if it meant losing himself. Before he could respond, she stepped forward, their bodies almost touching, and that's when everything happened. Their lips met with an intensity Daniel had never experienced before. The kiss was like a storm, a fusion of fire and ice, desire and regret, pleasure and guilt. It was impossible, and yet, it felt like the only thing that mattered. The world around them disappeared. There was no more party, no intrigue, no lies. All that existed was the heat spreading through their skin, the gentle touch of their hands, the way their bodies molded into each other. It was something forbidden, something he knew he shouldn't do, yet he couldn't control. When they finally pulled apart, the air felt too thick to breathe. Diana looked at him with a smile, but there was something sad in her eyes. Something that told him she knew this moment, just like everything happening, wasn't just about pleasure. It was about choices. And those choices, Daniel knew, would lead him down a path of no return. "Now you know, Daniel," Diana murmured, her voice softer, almost melancholic. "You can't go back. The kiss wasn't just a mistake. It was the beginning." He stared at her, trying to understand what those words meant, but he couldn't. The only thing he felt now was a mix of euphoria and guilt, a desire to run and, at the same time, an irrational need to stay by her side. But there was something else. He could see it in her eyes, a shadow of worry, as if she knew the price he would have to pay for crossing that line. The party continued outside, but for Daniel, nothing else mattered. He was trapped in an invisible web, and the only person who could help him break free was also the one who had ensnared him. And now he no longer knew what to do. The urge to uncover the truth still burned inside him, but the forbidden kiss he had just shared with Diana had changed everything. The line between right and wrong was thinner than ever. What would he do now? Where would this forbidden passion lead him? The party had already lost its magic for Daniel. He was physically there, in the middle of the crowd, but his mind was elsewhere, trapped in the moments he had shared with Diana. The kiss that had united them in that secluded corner of the party still burned inside him, but what tortured him most now was the feeling that he had crossed a line without knowing what lay beyond it. Diana had given him more than just her body, she had offered him a piece of her soul. And with that, Daniel knew the game had changed. Not just for him but for her as well. He could see it in her eyes, the disguised anguish, the sadness for something yet to happen, something perhaps even he wasn't prepared to face. He searched for her in the crowd, unable to push away what he felt. Finally, he saw her standing near the window, gazing at the city. The way she looked down at the street below, with a distant, lost expression, made Daniel's heart race. Something was about to be revealed, and he could feel that he could no longer run from it. Without thinking, he moved toward her, his legs heavy with doubt and fear. But there was something stronger than that, an uncontrollable need to understand what was happening, to unravel the mysteries Diana had so carefully guarded. "You called me?" Daniel asked, his voice hoarse, carrying a mix of curiosity and apprehension. She turned slowly, her green eyes now more intense than ever. The smile on her lips was barely noticeable, but Daniel caught the sadness in it, as if she were at war with herself. "I knew you'd come," she said, her voice low, but filled with a weight that threatened to shatter the silence. "But now you need to understand what's at stake. And there's no turning back, Daniel." He frowned, the unease growing inside him. "What's at stake, Diana? What is happening here?" She took a step forward, her words like sharp blades cutting through the tension between them. "What you don't know is that this party is a smokescreen. The intruders you saw aren't just here to steal money. They have something far more valuable in mind." A wave of fear and confusion twisted inside him. "And what am I in all of this? Just a pawn?" Diana held his gaze with an intensity that silenced him. "You're not just a pawn, Daniel. You're the key. You and we are the key to stopping what's about to happen." He felt the ground tremble beneath his feet. Everything was starting to make sense, but the price of the truth haunted him. "What do you want from me, Diana? What do I have to do to stop this?" She took a deep breath, and her gaze was no longer that of an enticing mystery. It was the look of someone who had already seen darkness and perhaps had been lost in it. "You have to choose, Daniel. What's about to happen will affect more lives than you can imagine. And the price of freedom is higher than you think." Her words echoed in his mind. "Freedom?" he whispered. "What do you mean by that?" Diana looked at him, her eyes now deeper, as if she carried a burden too heavy to be put into simple words. "When you walked into this party, you entered the game, Daniel. And to get out, you'll have to make sacrifices. We all will." He remained silent, the weight of her words beginning to settle on his shoulders. But what he didn't know was that the freedom Diana spoke of wouldn't come easily. The sacrifice she mentioned was something he wasn't prepared to pay. "You don't understand," she said, her tone almost desperate. "The party isn't just about who walks away with the biggest prize. It's about who survives." Fear gripped his throat. What Diana was saying was clear, but he still couldn't see the full picture. "And what are you going to do to stop it? How can we end this?" Diana looked at him, and for the first time, Daniel saw a vulnerability in her that he never expected. She was tired, exhausted from carrying this secret alone. "I've made my choices, Daniel. And now you'll have to make yours. But know that once you decide, there's no going back. The price of freedom will be the loss of something very valuable." She took a step back as if the weight of her own words had shaken her. What she was saying was clear, yet at the same time clouded. There was something she wasn't telling him, something he needed to discover on his own. "I'm going to help you save all of us, Daniel," she said with an unexpected softness. "But first you need to understand the cost. And to understand the cost, you will have to lose." The party now felt like a distant reality, as if everything around him was an illusion, a distraction. Daniel was about to make a choice that would change his life forever. But the truth was, he didn't know if he was ready to pay the price for his freedom. "I'm ready," he said, his voice firm, though his heart was not as sure as his words. He wanted to believe he was ready. But what was coming? What would he have to sacrifice to stop the worst from happening? Diana looked at him with a sad smile. "You'll find out soon, Daniel. And when you do, the truth will be heavier than you can imagine." The atmosphere of the party, once so vibrant and full of life, now felt stifling, as if the air was heavy with something far weightier than mere expectations. Daniel looked around, trying to discern, among the smiling faces and concealed glances, the feeling that everyone there was somehow involved in something far greater than he could comprehend. But now there was no more time for doubts or hesitations. He had a mission, to save the party and, more importantly, to save himself. The night had reached its climax, but it was not the glamour of the golden lights or the soft music that dominated the scene. It was the tension, the fear hanging in the air, a foreboding sense that something was about to happen, something no one there was prepared to face. And at the center of it all, Daniel felt his heart pounding faster with every passing second. Beside him, Diana, her face pale and her eyes deeper than ever, seemed to carry the weight of an even greater secret. She stepped closer, gripping his arm with unexpected force, as if trying to prevent him from running away. "It's time, Daniel. There's no turning back," she whispered, her voice laden with urgency. He looked at her, a mix of anger and concern flashing in his eyes. "I know, Diana. But what is really happening here? Why all of this? Who is behind it?" She hesitated for a moment, her lips trembling, before finally uttering a name that made Daniel's blood run cold. "Langley. Victor Langley. The magnate, the powerful man who seemed to be behind all the secrets, all the manipulations. But why was he so involved in this party? What did he want with all these wealthy and influential people?" Diana took a deep breath and, with a voice that trembled, continued, "Langley is more dangerous than you think. He didn't come here just to steal, Daniel. He wants something much darker, much more dangerous. He wants control. And I was part of it." Her words hit him like a bombshell. Daniel tried to process what she had just said, but the pain of discovering that Diana was somehow involved with Langley stole the air from his lungs. The woman he had begun to trust, the woman he had shared a kiss with, one filled with passion and unspoken promises, was now connected to that man. Before he could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. Daniel turned toward the door and saw shadows moving in their direction. Something was happening. Something beyond his control. "Not now, Diana. We have to act." "They're coming," Daniel said, gripping her hand tightly. She looked at him, her green eyes more intense than ever, but there was a sadness in them, as if she knew this was inevitable. "I warned you, Daniel. Now you have to choose. Stand with Langley or fight against him. But remember, the consequences will be severe, for everyone." Before he could reply, the door burst open and a group of armed men stormed into the room. Daniel braced himself for the confrontation, but something in his gut told him to question everything. Was he truly ready for the battle ahead? Was he prepared to face the monster that Langley represented? Diana positioned herself beside him, her expression resolute, as if she had made a final decision. "I'll help you, Daniel. But I won't protect you. You'll have to fight on your own." Those words burned in his chest. He knew Diana had made difficult choices, but now it was clear, the fight was his. He could no longer rely on her to get out of this. He had to be strong. The sound of weapons being cocked and the men advancing with determination only heightened the tension. Daniel was standing on a minefield, but there was no turning back. No more escape. With a swift motion, he pulled Diana behind him, positioning himself between her and the invaders. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly, but his gaze was steady. He couldn't let Langley win. Not now. Not after everything he had been through. "Stay out of my way," Daniel said, his voice firm and charged with a purpose he hadn't realized he had within him. The leader of the invaders smirked coldly, almost mockingly. "You're in a tough spot, Daniel. You won't leave here without paying a price." Before he could react, the leader signaled and the men advanced. Daniel braced himself for the worst, but in a surge of pure adrenaline, he did the unthinkable. He lunged forward, disarming the first attacker with a swift strike. The fight was brutal, but anger and the need to protect Diana fueled him. Every move, every blow felt heavy, but the adrenaline kept him sharp. He was fighting for more than just his life, he was fighting for his freedom, for something far greater. Diana, watching the battle unfold, did something unexpected. She didn't just stand by, she acted. With a precision that shocked Daniel, she disarmed another attacker, proving that beneath her apparent fragility, there was immense strength. The confrontation escalated, but the real battle was internal. Daniel knew that no matter how many men he fought, the war against Langley, and against his own fears, was just beginning. The tension peaked when Daniel finally locked eyes with Langley, who stood behind the others, watching the chaos unfold with a calculated smile. "You don't understand, Daniel," Langley said, his voice cold and condescending. "You're losing. You've already lost." But Daniel felt no fear. He stared at Langley, a newfound determination burning inside him. "I will fight until the end, Langley. You won't win." The battle was far from over, but from that moment on, Daniel knew he was ready for whatever came next. He would fight until his last breath because there was no other choice. He had come this far, and now it was time to face the man behind it all. The party had lost its sparkle, its lightness, the sense of exclusivity and glamour. Now all that remained was the rapid beating of anxious hearts, the echo of choices made, and the weight of consequences. Daniel looked around the room, where there had once been so much joy. Now everything felt empty, almost like a deserted stage after the end of a grand performance. But unlike a peaceful ending, what remained was an even greater tension. He didn't know if he was truly free or if somehow he was still trapped in a web of lies and manipulations. Diana stood beside him, but the distance between them felt greater than ever. He could see the pain in her eyes, a deep pain, as if she were saying goodbye to something or someone. Or maybe she was saying goodbye to herself. The silence that followed was heavy, almost unbearable. Neither of them knew what to say or how to react. The fight was over, but the internal battle was far from finished. What had they lost? What had they gained? Deep down, Daniel felt that no one would truly come out as the winner. You did all of this to save me, didn't you?" Daniel finally broke the silence, his voice hoarse, almost broken. Diana lifted her gaze, and for a moment their eyes met. She didn't need to answer. The words were written on her face, in the tension of her shoulders, in the way her hands now trembled. She was torn between the love she felt for him and the weight of the choices she had made. I didn't know who I was anymore, Daniel. I lost myself in this fight, in this game, and in the end, it felt like I could only save myself for you." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process everything she had said, everything that had happened. He turned to her, his eyes filled with conflicting emotions, the pain of knowing that she had risked everything, lost herself for him, mixed with the guilt of not having been able to protect her. I lost myself too, Diana. In this game, in this chaos. I thought I was fighting for something greater, for something real, but maybe, deep down, I was just trying to run away from myself. Running away from what really mattered. She shook her head as if trying to push the words away, but she knew Daniel was right. They had lost themselves. Amid so many secrets and lies, they had set aside what truly mattered, the genuine connection between them, trust, love. Hearing the sound of footsteps fading, Daniel looked toward the entrance of the room, where the police were finally taking control. Langley had been arrested, his plans thwarted. But deep down, the real prison seemed to be inside them. Inside what was left of their hearts. And at that moment, all Daniel wanted was to walk away, to find peace, to breathe, and maybe, somewhere in the future, find a way to move on. I don't know what the future holds for us, Diana. But maybe we both deserve a fresh start. I don't know how or when, but maybe, one day we'll find peace. Diana watched him for a long moment, her eyes filled with unshed tears. She knew that even though Daniel's words hurt, there was a raw truth in them. What they had been through couldn't be erased. But maybe there was something new to build, something outside the shadow of everything they had lost. She stepped closer, touched his arm gently, and in a soft voice said, "I hope we find each other someday. When all of this is just a memory." And with those words, something inside Daniel settled. There was no longer a need to control what the future would bring. They had made their choices. Now all that was left was to follow their own paths, each carrying the echoes of what they had lived but with the chance to rewrite their own stories. The confrontation, the fight, the lies, all of it was now in the past. What mattered was what came next. Daniel took a step back, one last look at Diana, and without another word, he turned and started walking toward the exit. He knew life would never be the same again. It didn't matter whether what he felt for Diana was love or a bitter memory. The future was still uncertain, but at least he had the chance to start over. In the end, the real battle wasn't against others or against enemies, it was against himself. The choices we make, the lessons we learn, and the price we pay. In the end, the heart is always the greatest judge. And so, as the party faded into the silent night, Daniel left behind more than just the chaos of one night. He left behind the weight of a divided heart, with the hope that one day he and Diana would meet again, more whole, stronger, freer. And so, the story of Daniel and Diana comes to an end? Or has it just begun? What happens after so much pain, so many difficult choices, and so much uncertainty? The question lingers, is there really a chance for a new beginning for them? And you, what would you do in their place? Leave your thoughts in the comments, share your ideas, and don't forget to like the video so our journey can continue even stronger. But before you go, get ready, because the next story will stir your emotions in ways you can't imagine. Each chapter is getting more intense, and you won't want to miss a single detail. So, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and follow the upcoming adventures, because what's coming next promises to be even more surprising. See you in the next chapter. Until then.